Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to my channel, Muchi World, where we get to have fun, where I share my stories. Not just my stories, I represent a lot of people, and by a lot of people, I'm talking about the nobodies, not a celebrity, just a regular person from the street. What keeps us going, where we come from, who we are, and where we are going, our struggles. And I want my channel to appeal to the ordinary person on the street, somebody who would never get a chance to sit in front of, say, an interviewer because you are a celebrity, but the regular people, the misfits. But we outnumber them. By regular, I mean normal, without any clout or without any big celebrity background, or just the regular person. You want to know how we think, because I think we are the majority. If you look at it and think about it, we are we outnumber the glamorous and the glamour and the celebrity and everything, and yet no one really knows anything about us, where we come from, what we do, except in scripted, what do you call them? Scripted documentaries and stuff. And you actually see that our stories are always guided by the interviewer, the questions that we get. So what I'm trying to do is to hear the African stories from the African people. And for me, as an introduction to this, I'll start talking about, I think it fits in very well, that actually the world has no idea that in Africa there is two types of Africans. It's not just African. When you see a black person, it's an African. No, that's not true. Absolutely wrong. There is two types of Africans. There is the urban African and there is the rural African. In my case, I'm lucky. I grew up in the rural, a place in Maswingo called Kutu, where I grew up with my grandma and my granddad. So my mom was a housemaid in the city, and her parents was down in the rurals. And I did my primary school in the rural areas. Like, if I say rural, I mean like the remote. I stayed with my grandma and my grandmother. I've always been very inquisitive because this colonial thing, I was very curious. Did I get it right? Curious to find out how my grandmother used to live before they met the white people. So I was lucky enough to live with my grandma, who started wearing clothes like these clothes, the white clothes, when she didn't know her age, but she said she was beginning to grow boobs. That's when they saw the first white person, Mr. Van Vuren, at a place. So they got there. That was in the 1920s, I think, 1930s. That's when she saw a white person for the first time. So basically, which means her childhood was based on the authentic rural life, which had no influence from any external things. There was no TV, radio, YouTube, whatever, all these things you've got today. So I personally got to see the traditional way of doing things, the traditional way of grinding we call it guyo in Shona, Karanga, Shona. Guyo, ne guyo, that grinding stone where you put rapoko there or millet, and then you grind it to get mealie meal. That's how they used to live back then. So anyway, a story for another day. I was saying there is two types of Africans, right? In this generation. And how did this happen? As the white people got here into Africa, like in our case, as they crossed Limpopo from South Africa coming into Zim, as they moved in and settled, they started building cities, townships. They started building growth points, introducing their Western life in our environment. And what they then did is they would look for, not look for, I mean, their lifestyle is very attractive. The Western lifestyle, I always laugh and say, and I think we'll talk about it one day, that we were going to be colonized anyway, whether by gun or by attraction. What I mean by attraction is human beings are all about survival, and they always look for better ways of doing anything, and that's how we've survived since the beginning to here. So people adapt to an effective way of doing things, and unfortunately or fortunately, the Westerners always had an attractive lifestyle and attractive way of doing things, which was very efficient. So naturally, people would be drawn. So when the cities were set up, you find that the young men of then would move away from the rurals into cities, because in the cities they started seeing new things, seeing a radio for the first time, seeing a camera for the first time, seeing lights, seeing all. So it was it's curiosity, I guess that word again. Curiosity. Yo, English. Yeah. So young men, young women moved into town, right? So you find that in the case of Rhodesia, then Zim, Rhodesia, named after Cecil John Rhodes, even the neighboring countries, because I think there was something about Rhodesia that they moved in. But anyway, story of another day. We had a federation, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, Nyasaland. So the capital was in Southern Rhodesia, which is Zim now. So most Malawians and Zambians, anyway, they moved into cities. So it was more attractive. It was nice. You would see cars, carts, horses, things that our ancestors or our grandparents were never used to. So in doing so, they went into town. So you find that the first generation, they used to go back to the rurals. Like in our case, our fathers, they would go into town, they work when it's rain season, they would go back and plow. And when they are done plowing, then they move back, they go back. So things were good. And but then you find that there were immigrants who couldn't go back. So what they did is they would then get a house in the city, they stay there, they have kids there. And in doing so, you find that our local Shona people and the Ndebelers, they would migrate. So they wouldn't want to have a city life and a rural home, a city home and a rural home. They would want to have just a rural home and somewhere to rent when the father. So it was mainly the father. But then, our fathers, they were young. They go to town, they leave our mothers back home. They go to town, they meet young girls, and nature calls. So they would start having girlfriends in town, and some actually have kids in town. So they couldn't take the kids back home. So the kids start staying in town. And then when the government was offering houses, they would get a house, and then, the dynamic another story for another day. So then the kids that stay in town, they stay there, born in town, bred in town, including the immigrant kids from Mozambique, Malawi, the surrounding countries. South Africa, they were also coming. So you find that these kids were purely urban. So their influence was purely urban. But then by urban, they used to borrow the Western culture, the Western way of doing things, and which is the music. They would watch TV here and there. So then the dress, the fashion, and they would emulate what the white people were doing. So they started learning the English language. It's a natural progression that happens. You always copy what you see and what you emulate, and that's how the urban African was born. But it's not many. But then, hear this. The urban African became very powerful because whenever the rural one used to, like during school holiday, I can speak for myself, during school holidays, when you moved from rural to town, and then you look at these guys, you look at the way they dress, the way they talk, the way they do everything, the music they listen to, and how they talk and how they looked at us. They looked more like a strange African because they were different. Their accent, not this borrowed accent, the way they what they liked, the music. And I'm talking about not now, like back in the 60s, 70s. I used to look at my mother's photos. And then I started comparing it with the African American of the same time. And I don't know how this used to get here, but I think technology had improved. People were getting TVs. But there was a strong influence. And now the urban African would look down upon the rural African. But it's understandable. We were backward. There is a lot of things that we didn't know. Time was moving. Time waits for no one. So as young people in the rurals, our dream was to be like, the urban. So our dream was to work hard in the rural, go to school, and then after school you migrate into urban so that you can join this lifestyle, bright lights, music, movies and stuff, glamour. But this, in hindsight, it was, mental colonization. Some may be tempted to say, but really it wasn't. It's the adaptation that we're talking about, because the only way you can learn about this stranger that came was Namavi, meaning those that don't have knees, the white people, because they used to wear trousers. When they came, what they sold to us, or what we saw, was so superior in every way, from their ammunition to cars to all that. So we thought, okay, the only way we can learn about them is to be closer to them. You speak their language, you watch how they eat and everything. Some might call it mental colonialism, but I don't think so. It was just adaptation it's a new wave. Let's remove the colonization, let's remove everything. It's the human species that's surviving on planet Earth that come up with a system for the human species to move forward, efficient. Unfortunately, ours was too slow, like way too slow. So it only makes sense it's wisdom to pick up the efficient one. So the African was born. So now, anyway, I think I'm going astray a bit, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna cover it in our next episode. So now, what we are faced with is we have grown men and grown women my age who really don't know what the rural life is. And then you have people like me who were half urban, half rural. Hence, I can authoritatively talk about this because I saw the dynamics. Our lives are totally different. I am. It's funny that I wanted to move to the city with my mom, and I did. But as I saw the life in the city, because we were very poor, like extremely poor in the city, so there I would stay at the back house of my mom's employers. As I see the dynamics, what's going on, my mom working for these people, cooking for them, washing for them, and doing all those things, I was asking myself a lot of questions, like how is this possible? And I looked at them like they were these gods, these people from some other planet, because their way of life was totally different from us. So now, getting back to the main subject of the rural and urban African. So in the rural areas, people live the traditional way. Well, now it's not similar, but we still have a little bit to hang on to because there's been now rural to urban migration, urban to rural migration. So technology is filtered down to the rurals and TVs are everywhere. So the world has become smaller. But then still, that influence is still there. The urban African, mostly these were the first black people to get jobs in media, which is TV and radio, because they could speak well, they could speak the local language, they could speak English. And now this became the window to the African lifestyle. Even today, it's still going on. So now you find that the image that the outside people have of what Africa is represented by the urban African. If you don't move to the urban, acquire the gadgets, whether you then move to the rural and shoot their lifestyle, that's a different story. But everything happens in the urban. If you look at music even today, which is my favorite subject anyway, today you find that the music that's known outside is the pop music which was played in the urban cities. And the traditional African, authentic African music, you will never hear it from the West. The USA knows about the Burna Boys, about the Nigerian pop sound. Even from the Fela Kutis and Manu Dibankos, all those guys. That's how they got to know about African. That's the image they've got. And you find that even when they make sequels or musicals or documentaries, movies to portray the African, they always portray the urban. They will look at the urban dwelling, whether it's in shacks or whether it's in the Lokshan, which is the high density suburbs. That's what they call then Africa, but in actual fact, no, that's not. And the rural population is actually bigger. I think now it has gone down to about 60 to 70% rural. It used to be around 90. Very few people stayed in cities, but now because of technology, every young person has a dream to be closer to the trends of technology and everything. And the only way you can do it is when you move to urban. Like now in the cyber age, I call it the cyber age, where internet has become like oxygen. You find it more efficient in the cities through Wi-Fi, fiber, or whatever. But again, as we keep talking, you will realize that it's a normal progression. The African is also trying to join in to this human species phenomenon of improving and moving technologically. And the first step you get as an African to be in the technology space is to go to school. And when you go to school, whether in rural or in urban, if you're in rural, then you move to cities, you start learning things, how things are done. Whereas, yeah, now it is different. But then for the case of Zim, I can safely say other African countries. But in this case, I can talk about Zim because the powers that be then took education as a religion, like going to church. That's how important education was. So you find that most rural people then went to school and excelled in school, and they went to Harvard, they went to Oxford, all those places, and most of them are actually in leadership now in urban place. So they moved. So what then happens is they moved with their, if it was music they used to listen to, then they moved with it to urban.